On this episode of the VROOM podcast, another boring track with a great race.
There's some qualification mishaps happening.
And the Bottas woes continue.
Finally, we have Mercedes kind of struggling and seeing Red Bull go ahead.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 10 of the VROOM podcast. As always, I'm your host, Wills Jones, along with my wonderful co-host, Simon Martel. How's it going, Simon?
It's going well. It's going well. Just came back from golfing. So, just had an 18 hole, in my body, but I'm very happy to be doing this. I found a great way to get ready for the show was seeing the Habs win.
Yes.
In their playoffs right now, 4-1. It's looking good. They're playing tomorrow on the 24th. They're going to be playing against Vegas. Whoever listens to this might know what happens. I don't know it yet, but I'm hoping we're going to the Stanley Cup. Oh, I'm hoping.
Hopefully. The Canadian pride. I'm praying for them.
Yeah, and other than that, I'm surprised we made it to 10 episodes. I don't know if surprised or very happy, but 10 is a landmark. Already 10, and I'm excited to see how much more we do.
Yeah, we've hit double digits.
All right, let's talk about the race. French Grand Prix. What's the first thing you think about when you hear that Grand Prix?
Really boring and a headache and maybe some motion sickness from all the squiggly lines beside the track.
Well, yeah, okay. Except from the squiggly lines, I got a happy surprise this year. I was not expecting to be following as closely as I followed the race on Sunday, because that was a very entertaining race.
Yeah, no, it's usually a race where you can watch the first 2 laps and then take a nap and then tune in for the last 2 laps, and not a whole lot has changed. But oh my goodness,
a lot had changed.
We were treated to something special this race.
Yeah, exactly. And it just kind of impacts. Well, not maybe impacts not the wrong word, but it just kind of makes me realize how good of a timing we have. We started this show during a great Grand Prix so far. Great season.
Oh, an amazing season to start a podcast about Formula One.
It's definitely going to be one for the ages, at least. Well, who knows how it's going to end, but the fact that we have 2 competitive cars, 4 competitive cars, but 2 competitive teams battling it out, and we still don't know who has a chance to win, is really good for the sport, and it's really exciting as a spectator to watch.
Oh yeah. And just, there's a Christian Horner quote from after the race, and it's, if we can beat them here, we can beat them anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is so nice to hear.
Yeah, that's really deep, because I agree. That's even something I wrote down in my notes that I'm sure we'll come back to. But let's not wait any further and jump in. So do you want to kind of give me a rundown of what the track looks like? How is it built? Maybe a little backstory if you have anything interesting to share with us about the Circuit Paul Ricard.
Yeah, so it usually provides not the most exciting races, because you don't have a lot of heavy, super heavy braking zones into corners that would be easy to pass. It's a lot of really long straightaways. It's just one of those tracks. It's a lot like Barcelona. It's got a lot of very long corners, some pretty tight corners, but overall a pretty boring track to watch, in my opinion. This is the 16th time they've been to Paul Ricard. I think the first race there was in the 70s, so it's been on the calendar for a while. It
was gone for a little bit.
It was gone for a little bit. It's in the last, I think, 5 years, it's come back as the consistent French Grand Prix track. A lot of fans don't like it because it does kind of look like a maze out there, but it threw up some great racing this weekend.
There's also another thing I think which would be interesting to talk about is I don't know if you remember when we were talking about Baku, we said how interesting the 90-degree angles were and how surprisingly it made for great racing. Well, you can think about the circuit Paul Ricard as the exact opposite. I don't think there's one single like hard corner. They're all very soft turns. It's all in longitude about keeping the speed, which just makes it a lot harder to see passing action.
Yeah, there's a lot of dirty air. It's a lot of long flowing corners, not too many big heavy braking zones, as I said before. So yeah, it usually doesn't throw up good racing, but I think, obviously they've done some stuff to the cars in this last season to try and limit the amount of dirty air thrown off for them. And it's made racing at these tracks with a lot of wide open corners a lot better.
It also, yeah, I agree. And I think this kind of brings me to the first point I really want to talk about is that we're saying how this is like a quick racetrack. There's cars keep their speed and there's a lot of problem with dirty air. But another thing that we saw a big impact to have those high speeds were the flexi wing that we definitely talked a lot about here. Red Bull was definitely like the biggest impacted team, but had built a rear wing that would deform a lot under high speed and would kind of give them an advantage. And it seemed like they were not following the rules or the intention of the rules about the amount of flex a wing could have. And this race was the first race where they fixed the way they tested the wing.
Yeah, and it didn't seem to have that much of an effect on the Red Bull car. Like, I think a lot of people were pretty worried that, it would slow them down significantly because with that wing, like, as you said, dropping when they're under high speed and there's a high aero load on it, it kind of acts as a sort of form of DRS. And the sturdier, stiffer rear wing for the Red Bulls really didn't seem to hinder them too much. So it's good to see that even with the modifications that the FIA imposed on them, they were still able to have a fast competitive car.
Yeah, exactly. And I imagine the engineers back at Red Bull definitely, as soon as they heard that there was some people talking about it and they noticed it, they already were on to the next thing. They have to adapt and what's the next thing they can work on. But yeah, that was the first thing I wanted to talk about was that new rule or the new way they tested the wings. So that impacted the flexi wing. And then there's another new rule that got introduced this weekend, and that's relating to tires. So the official verdict, what came out from all the news about the tire failures at Baku, well, a couple of weeks later, now Pirelli came back and said, you know what, we're not at fault. There's nothing wrong with our tires. It's the teams that run our tire under the recommended pressure. Well, they decided to have a mandatory tire pressure, and it now runs 2 or 3 psi higher than it used to. So they have much stiffer tires.
Yeah, and you'll see we'll talk about it for free practice, and I guess we can sort of move on to that now. Is like the teams were doing a lot of data collection during free practice to understand how those tires would like react to the higher pressures that they were having to run. And it may not seem like 2 psi is that much in terms of increasing tire pressure, but that increase in pressure when the tires warm up, it'll affect more of how the tires perform, and when they warm up, the tire pressures change, and it'll affect more how those pressures change within the tire. So teams having to take time to figure that out really potentially made for a more interesting race. Just because they're doing more testing and less sort of getting used to the track and making sure they can go as fast as possible. They're more seeing how the tires are going to react.
Yeah, and also leads to an interesting aspect where all of a sudden teams were not sure how long they could run their tires, how hard they could push them because of the change in tire pressure. Basically, the entire backlog of data gathering on those tires that they've been doing for the last couple of seasons where they've been running the similar tires, well, it's all worthless now because the pressure is different. And so I think it was very interesting to see, because as we'll talk about in the race later on, it changed strategies and teams had to adapt and change what their original plan was. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, that probably affected the outcome of the race.
Yeah, and I mean also, to talk more about what's going on in practice, it was a great showing for Alpine in the practices. They really came out and did well in the practice sessions.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Like Alpine definitely felt the pressure. France is their home race. They have the French driver. Like it's the exact time when they need to perform. I'm sure the executive in the boardroom are telling them, if you have to run race, this is the one. And they definitely had a really good looking car, at least in free practice.
Yeah.
The other thing we saw during free practice, well, it kind of applied finally for the entire weekend, was that Mercedes did a chassis swap. And so we talked about this last week, that maybe that disadvantaged Bottas. Well, they swapped chassis again. So I guess there is in some way a fairness where they both get their turn to kind of do the same things, but you can keep that in mind as well, that maybe the difference in chassis helped or hindered some of the drivers.
Yeah, and I
I
thought
think
too,
it helped Bottas,
I think so as well.
Yeah.
Lewis was saying that he did not like the new chassis at all.
Yeah.
And so it might be saying something, but I also find it interesting that they would swap the chassis, because I'm not sure if Lewis and Valtteri are similar in height, but usually those chassis are built to spec for the driver, and other drivers won't fit in the chassis. When George Russell had to fill in for Lewis, he said he did not fit into that car very well because he's taller than Lewis Hamilton is, and he said it was a pretty tight fit in there for him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder. I imagine they are pretty similar height. I wouldn't say a similar shape. I think Bottas, it's a bit bigger shoulders, but I think they're similar heights.
Yeah. I don't know. That was just something that kind of surprised me, that a team would swap over the chassis between drivers. I don't think I've ever heard of that happening in F1 before.
Maybe that's just one of the ways that they found to sue peace, they have to keep Valtteri at least happy enough until the end of the season. So
very true.
All right. So that was kind of Friday, Saturday morning, the free practice. Let's move on to qualifying. So I think we had a pretty good qualifying session. Not much happened, but there is something that happened on Q1. Somebody got a red flag. You remember who it was?
Yeah, Yuki Tsunoda on his first flying lap. He didn't even get to set a time. He comes through, I think it was turn 2 or 3, and the back end of the car just comes out on him. And the reaction of that car over the super sticky high traction surface at Paul Ricard that they use to slow the cars down, because they don't use gravel traps like other race courses do. The way the back of that car reacted and shook around.
It seemed like the entire drivetrain was stuck, and it was kind of just forcing on the gear, but I don't understand how that is. I imagine maybe Yuki wasn't able to put it in neutral. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so usually when a car goes into a spin like that, and obviously the drivetrain wants the tires to go forwards when you're in any gear, but reverse, or I guess pulling it into neutral as well, will let them freely spin. So he came around, and usually those cars can handle a spin and keep going, but I think getting onto the super sticky surface, the high traction zone on the off tracks, really you saw the way the back end shook around. I really think that did a lot of damage to the gearbox. Now, in free practice, Sebastian Vettel also had a spin in a similar place, and his car as well, he had trouble getting it into neutral and then first again, but he was able to get his Aston Martin going. So I'm wondering if maybe there's some difference between the Mercedes and Red Bull drivetrain and how durable it is in terms of being able to be shaken around.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's definitely like, this is where you also see the difference in experience, between Vettel, which has so many years of experience, and Tsunoda, who's a rookie. His crash did actually like cost him a lot. So he crashed in Q1, so already wasn't qualifying very high, but he ruined his floorboard and had to change transmission, I
His
think, right? Or
gearbox,
yeah,
yeah.
gearbox. So he started from the pits at the end of the day. So definitely a costly mistake. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to be finishing Q1 anyways, I imagine a new gearbox and floor is probably a nice trade.
Yeah, it's all fresh components. So
Yeah.
you get the nice fresh stuff for the race. And then Lance Stroll, I don't know what happened to this guy because of Yuki's spin was pretty early on. Like he
Yeah.
realistically should have had plenty of time to set a lap, and just every time he went out for his flying lap, he got caught up in traffic, kept backing out of it. And I was kind of thinking like it's Q1, like it's not like it's Q2 or Q3 where you really want like a super clean nobody around me lap. I really don't know why. Like, okay, dodge through the traffic, get, maybe a little bit of dirty air. Most of the other drivers got out of the way for him. So him backing off, and he usually backed off once he had gotten through everybody. So that's like inexplicable to me as to why he wasn't able to set a lap in Q1.
Yeah, that's interesting because I definitely didn't see it initially as his fault, but the way you describe it, there's definitely a certain point, a certain blame on him that like you always have to expect that it might happen, that there might be those crashes. So I think at some point, probably the new like routine, or at least the new expectations, is that you set that flying lap very quick for those kind of incident, because this is like almost getting routine of happening almost every weekend that a red flag ends a session.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I wonder if the FIA is going to come with an answer to that, because so far I don't think he deserved to be Q1. Like Stroll has a better car and he's a better driver than that, and so it did make for an interesting race because he started from the back and then had a lot of cars in front of him. But yeah, I still feel like, I don't know. What about a system where you are like certified to at least have one flying lap? You know, you didn't make it to Q1 or whatever. Like, look, Q2, like 5 minutes before the start of Q2, you can do one lap, and if you make it, you make it, and then Q2 start with like 16 people or whatever. I don't know. Maybe
that
that
would
could be
be
a thing.
that would be a very interesting system. I would quite like that if like, and in sort of use it as like in the situation where you weren't able to set a lap in Q1, you get that one sort of free lap after the clock has hit zero just to see if you can set a time to get you in.
Yeah, I imagine the probably like the question would be like, how do you make sure people don't abuse it and say like, oh, this wasn't my like lap, when they make a lap with like 10 seconds slower or whatever. Because that's kind of the problem with Stroll, was that he did put a lap, but it was like a minute slower. Like it wasn't a flying lap, but how do you say, oh, this wasn't like my lap where I tried?
Yeah, exactly. Or like you back off a whole bunch on a corner where it's maybe pretty easy to back off and not have it be super obvious. So there's definitely like some cheeky F1 workarounds that could be done if a system like that gets put into place. But I also think this could be another great example of sort of why F1 needs qualifying penalties for putting out a red flag.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely something that has to be done, because we see it so far this season, and I don't expect it to slow down. But red flagging a session is not great for fans. It's not great for the racers who get penalized by someone else's mistake. And so I think it could be a very interesting thing to try to adapt around it.
Yeah. And so now moving on to Q2, if you don't have anything else to add, Simon.
No, I'm good to Q2, which is the first time someone makes it there.
Yeah. So Mick Schumacher made it to Q2, but at what cost? Because he he brought out the red flag to end Q1 with his spin on his cooldown lap. So he was able to qualify into Q2, spun on his cooldown lap, wrecked his car, and wasn't able to compete in Q2. And I like genuinely like as you know, I was a big Michael fan when I was a kid. Like I was excited to see a Schumacher into Q2 and see what the kid could do there. So it you know, it's just one of those things where a little bit more experience and I don't think he has that issue.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Like, man, the Haas car is so unbelievably like not competitive that like it's probably going to be the only time he makes it to Q2.
I know.
Except if like 5 cars crash out during Q1. But good for him. Happy to have him, make it, and hopefully that kind of just motivates him to stick around and hopefully make it happen again. I
Yeah,
say
and I
the car is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, I was gonna say like hopefully that this gives him the confidence that he knows that he can push that car and get it to a better qualifying position than second or third last on the grid.
Yeah, exactly. And like another thing we can definitely talk about is the fact that Haas might have an only competitive car, but the other one that has a very uncompetitive car is Williams. And Russell has been qualifying in Q2 for what every single racing weekend so far this season. Like he's unbelievable to see what he can do with that car.
I know George Russell on single lap pace has to be like one of the like per capita for which car you have, fastest drivers.
You know what though? That's just scary. Imagine him being put into like a 2019 Mercedes car, just pole and just never gets any competition. Like, oh la la, that would not be a good showing.
Well, that's got to be why Lewis is scared to have him as a teammate, because Lewis as well is one of those drivers with pretty astonishing one lap pace, and he can kind of set a fast lap in the race whenever he really wants to. So I think those two in equal machinery would be an amazing fight.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Hopefully we see it. I think it's going to come the news probably around winter, like the summer break. At least that's what all the gossip is saying. If you keep an eye out, that's what you start hearing from the Twitters and from the Reddits and from little sources around the league, is that he's going to have that contract. It's probably been signed, or at least it's being talked about right now, and it's going to be made public coming back from the summer break.
Yeah. So very, very excited to see if he does get that Mercedes seat, which I think a lot of people talk about, F1 drivers deserving stuff. And I saw a video a few weeks ago of, the world like changing the F1 world champions for who deserved to win the world championship. So
Okay.
it's definitely like one of those terms in Formula One that comes up a lot. But I genuinely think that George deserves that Mercedes seat.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the other question now is Bottas going to accept going down to Williams? Like, he has good performance, and he's definitely like he has been performing in top tier teams. I don't know if I see him kind of accept him being a bottom like tier like Raikkonen is doing.
Yeah, and that's also like Williams has like some good young drivers in Formula 2 that they would be able to bring up, and they have some good reserve drivers and test drivers as well. So I think if Valtteri says no to going to Williams, then I don't think he has a Formula 1 seat anymore, and he's probably moving to GT cars or rally cars.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that statement. Well, I guess we'll see. We'll see when the news comes out, but definitely very interesting to see. And I'm hopeful for Russell that he makes it, because you know what? At the end of the day, like if Bottas is able to meet with a Williams team and see what the engineers have been working on at the factory and is happy with the progress that they seem to be having for 2022 regulations, he might just stay because he could probably be the front runner for Williams next to Latifi.
Yeah, exactly. Like he go to a team where you are the number one driver as well from so long being Lewis's number two.
Yeah.
I think would be a good feeling. So
Yeah, exactly.
there are a lot of variables at play there for sure.
Well, talking about a number one who's been number one for just an enormous amount of years, and just recently, I imagine. What do you think? Last year, was Vettel still number one at Ferrari? Not the second half of the season, right?
I think he was 1.5 at Ferrari.
Yeah, okay. Well,
But
we are talking about Vettel. P12 in the Aston Martin. Not bad.
yeah, definitely. I think he's etching closer and closer to being able to get that car into Q3. And we've seen Lance Stroll a couple times, I do believe, has gotten that Aston Martin into Q3. So it's definitely it can be a Q3 car on the right track. So I think Vettel's just etching his way closer and closer to that.
Man, Lance Stroll, when I think about it, has just had so much bad luck for in qualifying because he's been performing, but it just seems like a lot of incident and stuff, never really his fault, have been kind of impacting his season so far.
You know, like I said earlier, like George Russell is a great one-off, hot lap driver. I think Lance Stroll is a far better like driver when it comes to racecraft than a lot of other drivers on the grid. Like,
and that a lot of people gave him credit for. He's
yeah.
like his passing game, especially his starts. He almost consistently gains 2-3 places. He's phenomenal race like starter.
Yeah, I remember there were a while ago, people were like, oh, he's just a pay driver, his daddy pays for his seat. And I like when people would say that to me, I'd be like, well, if you look at his stats, like he doesn't get passed all that often. He either finishes where he started or passes his way up, and they're usually on track passes.
Yeah.
So he's exactly. Definitely a very talented driver.
It kind of leads me to what I wanted to say about Vettel's P12 is that we saw him last Grand Prix winning, podium sitter. A couple of other Grand Prix finishing in the points. This week he finished in the points. What do you think's up with that car and just qualifying? It just seems like they never have the performance they're able to show in race.
It could be that they just set the car up sort of all weekend to have better race performance than qualifying performance, because the team knows that they have two very good drivers when it comes to a racing scenario, and that they realize those are their drivers' strengths. So let's set the car up for their strengths, and have it be in sort of race trim all weekend instead of switching it from a qualifying trim to a race trim.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think that also impacts another team that one of their teammates actually didn't make it past Q2, and that's Esteban Ocon and Alpine. We were saying how strong they looked in free practice, but then once it got time to qualifying, that their car is just not top tier.
Yeah, like they have a fantastic race car. Like both of those drivers are able to pull some pretty good results out of those cars, and the sort of one lap pace doesn't seem to be there. Now Alonso did get the car into Q3, and that could just come down to the experience of that driver. And he's a two-time world champion. He's been in Formula One since the early 2000s. Like he's a 20-year veteran of the sport. So I think it sort of comes down to that in terms of, Alonso being able to pull performances out of that car a little bit better than Esteban.
Yeah, and compared to what we saw at the start of the season, where Esteban seemed more comfortable and performed better in the car, Alonso's definitely getting into his rhythm. He's kind of starting to understand the car. He's been outperforming his teammate now for 2 or 3 races.
Yeah, and that like comes down to the experience, and Alonso just having to take some time to get used to the car, get used to the speed again. Like he had been out of Formula 1 for a while, and like he raced. Obviously, he's won the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while, and like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a lot of experience, and he's been in Formula 1 for a while. And like he's had a and he raced in the Dakar races last year. So just taking his time, getting back up to speed with the sport, with the car. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of the Fernando Alonso of old. So I'm glad to see him get back to speed.
Yeah. Um, let's move on to Q3. Pretty interesting Q3. No incident or anything, but um, Max P1, Mercedes 2-3, and then Perez P4. There's worse, there's worse qualification. Like that's a pretty standard and not bad thing to see.
Yeah, I
I
think
imagine.
as
Oh, sorry, go for it.
well, I was gonna say, like, I think as Red Bull, like if you consistently expect Max to be either one or two in qualifying, then you can really only ask Perez to be, three or four.
Yeah,
So I think that's sort of what they're expecting from him. I don't think they're expecting to have a Red Bull front row lockout or like too many throughout the season. So
yeah.
yeah, I think that's a good starting position for Perez. I think what's really surprising is Ferrari 5 and 7.
Good for them. It looks like. I mean, we'll talk about them with their race because they've had a pretty rough race, but at least in qualifying, like they still showed the same kind of strength that their car is competitive. At least when they're racing by themselves, like the car has been making a lot of progress and it looked good out there.
Yeah, and I mean it's definitely some contrast from Leclerc's last two pole positions. Like it's got to be a little bit of a hit to the pride for the team and for Charles not to be qualifying, inside that top four, but it's definitely still like a good spot for Ferrari to be in. And I think
Yeah,
it
and
it it opened up possibility for them in the race. It just unfortunately did not come through for them.
another big thing as well is that like at this point in the championship, like the clans or the positions have kind of been formed where you can see that the battle for third place in the constructor is going to be between Ferrari and McLaren. And so Ferrari, I imagine, just see this as an absolute win. Just both cars out qualifying McLaren.
Yeah, and that really, like, in terms of sort of their championship fight for the best of the rest, as it were, is like that's all you can ask for, is just qualify ahead of our closest rivals and hopefully we can block them out all race.
Yeah, and there's none other than my favorite troublemaker. I mean, I don't know how much trouble he makes, but the little annoying guy that comes and ruins someone's party. Well, Pierre Gasly just right in there, splitting the two Ferraris at P6. I think we're repeating ourselves so much, but what a great driver, and the things he's able to do with that car, just week in and week out, it's just a very impressive thing to see, and I'm always very happy to see him get good results.
Oh, 100%. And I've said this before, I cannot wait until he's potentially out of Alpha Tauri, because it's obviously a lesser car to the Red Bull. They use, last year's Red Bull spec parts. So if he can get into a car that has relatively, bespoke parts on it and, running the newest, the best stuff every season, I'm really excited to see what he'll be able to do.
Yeah, and so kind of rounding up what happened in Q1, Norris, Alonso, and then Ricardo finished 8th, 9th, and 10th. So Alonso's happy. He's not last. He made it to Q1. Ricardo, good for him. It's been now a couple races where he wasn't even making it to Q1. Now he's making it. Hopefully he's getting comfortable with his car because he's always a great character to have around the grid. And seeing him struggle wasn't necessarily something good for anyone.
Yeah, and I really think like this weekend, like the Honey Badger was back in full force. That's his sort of self-proclaimed nickname. And there was that video that went around the internet a while ago with a dude with an Australian accent, and the Honey Badger doesn't give a fuck or whatever. So I
Honey
think
Badger
that,
don't care. Honey Badger don't care.
Exactly. So I think, he's back to just being that, crazy honey badger going out hunting people down, just being an absolute menace on the racetrack when it comes to pace and what he can do. So I'm excited to see him getting some confidence back in that car for sure.
All right. Shall we move on to the race?
Yes, sir.
We shall. All right. So with the grid we had, I think if we just look at the starting grid and we can imagine what's going to happen, Verstappen P1, Hamilton P2, um, Bottas P3, Perez P4. I see that, and I see like Verstappen and Hamilton just pulling away, Bottas and Perez having their own little fight, and then the fifth car just, leading the middle pack way behind. And it's kind of what happened, but in a very different way than I imagined. Right off the bat, what was it? Second turn?
Yeah, turn two.
Max Verstappen just fucked up. There's no other way to say it, but he just completely misjudged his braking distance and went right through.
I don't think he misjudged his braking distance as much as there are usually some pretty high winds at Paul Ricard. I think that he got caught out from the wind going through turn one, and he fishtailed a little bit, was able to catch it, but not catch it soon enough to be able to go through turn two. And obviously had to go around, let Lewis take the place and join back in. I wouldn't as much say he fucked up as he misjudged the situation.
Yeah, okay, that's probably more political, but at the end of the day, it's pretty crazy. I imagine, Christian Horner probably had a little bit of a heart attack when his front lead, his front leader just lost the place after two turns in the Grand Prix.
Yeah. Now I don't think Christian Horner's ever gonna hit his desk as hard as Toto Wolff will. I want a G meter on Toto's desk just to know how hard he smacks.
Yeah, so when I saw Max lose the position, I was almost ready to close the TV and be like, oh, the race is done. Okay, it's gonna be a Hamver bot, and we're done here. Okay, 50 boring last laps coming in, and very happily, that's not what happened.
No, strategy played such a huge role in this race, like an immense role.
And I'm really happy that we talked about tires last week because they was so relevant this week.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the huge thing this week, and I think it kind of comes back as well to the modified tire pressure that Pirelli imposed, but teams did not seem confident on their estimates of tire wear. It surprised me so much because we saw teams pit on lap 15 to change out the tires, while other teams lapped on like lap 35, 36. Like, what a crazy difference. And just, you can see how much, of course there was different stints, people starting on hard or on soft, but there's just a distance that some people decided to keep their tires were very different. And some teams got it right and some teams got it completely wrong.
And yeah, and I mean, Lewis Hamilton, who's usually like the king of tire preservation, he's on like lap 4 going, man, these tires are done. Like there's no grip out here. I have nothing left in these tires. Max was like, I'm not so sure the tires can make it. And I don't think Checo had a problem with his tires all race. Like Sergio Perez has become the new king of tire management, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Like at this point, we know that when Hamilton says, Toto, my tires are gone, that means actually like, okay, order me some pizza to celebrate my win that I'm going to be about to do in 10 laps.
Exactly. But he was saying like, there's no grip. That's got to have a totally different like pit crew message meaning too.
Yeah, exactly. And then what we saw was that some teams tried the undercut. And so they brought in Bottas first, I think, to change their tires. And so Bottas was third. He had built a little bit of space where he could do that. And then Red Bull surprised everybody by going in and pitting first. And when Bottas pit and stuff, Verstappen had a lot of space for a hot lap. pitted and then had a lot of space for his outlap, and he just completely destroyed like Hamilton. Like he came in like before him, and it was just a masterful piece of work of strategy.
Yeah, and if you listen to the team radio when Lewis is coming out of the pits, his pit wall says to him like, okay, you should have 1.5 seconds on Verstappen.
Which is a lot. 1.5, you're out of
Yeah,
DRS zone. Like it's a lot.
and it was not the case at all. Lewis came out of the pit lane and Max zoomed by him. Like it,
Yeah, it's
they
crazy.
were obviously quite close and were very much racing out of the pit lane, but Max had the advantage. He was ahead when Lewis came out of the pit lane, ahead into turn one, and it just, I think Mercedes were I think they've gotten a little bit overconfident with their strategy and thinking that they're, very much the top strategy team.
Yeah, and then what was crazy to see is that Max came out in front again, which was very good for him. But as they started racing and racing, Hamilton definitely like was able to keep up and keep the pressure on him. And finally, what happened was that Red Bull pitted again, and I think there was maybe 3 or 4 seconds between Max and Hamilton, which is nothing when you think about pitting. Like he's going to lose all of that. And the fact that Red Bull called it said, okay, we're doing double pit, and Max came in, did it, and then came out, and he had 15 laps to make it work. It was really a great way to end the race.
Yeah, and I listened to the sort of Christian Horner's reasoning behind why they did that, and Max came over the radio and said, I don't think these tires are going to be able to make it to the end. Christian went and talked with the strategists, and they brought him okay, here's what we can do, and if he doesn't think he's going to be able to make it to the end on these tires, then we have nothing to lose pitting him and doing a two stopper and seeing where it gets us.
Yeah, exactly. And like the other thing I think they probably had in mind, I don't know if that's what they said to Christian, but I'm sure they had it in their mind where they're like, look, we got caught already once by Mercedes pulling this move on us. Let's not make that happen, and let's pull it on them.
Yeah, I would imagine there was a little bit of that too. Like okay, we're not gonna.
Yeah, we're not playing this game again.
We're not gonna fuck up our strategy that badly again. We're gonna make sure that we get it right this time. And you saw it. Max was able to pass on lap 52 of 53 for the win, and that is just got to be an ecstatic feeling for the pit crew. Like you know that like you've had the whole right strategy all along, and it's all paid off on pretty much the last lap.
Yeah, and what was crazy is that you saw how much like Mercedes tires were done. I think there was like 15 laps when the double pit was attempted, like double stop strategy, or 20 laps. And when Verstappen comes out, he has Perez, Bottas, and Hamilton in front, right? He comes out P4. He has 3 race cars in front of him. Catches up to Perez. It's expected. He hasn't.
It's the teammate pass, team orders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hasn't switched his tires. Gives him so much space. It was crazy to see. And I loved what he said. He said, go get them. Like that's already a great sign of a good team that wants to win.
That is what you need for a teammate. Like, hey, Checo, like move over. We're going to let Max through. Sure thing. Give him hell, boys.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's awesome.
And like I'm sure he was kept in the loop that he had like that new pit stop. So it's like there's not much at that point to argue with. But the other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that like that's something we talked about, that like Red Bull needed that second man to help defend for Verstappen against Hamilton or whatever, exactly in those scenarios. Well, that's what Mercedes have or hope they have in Bottas. And at the end of the day, he did not even hold him up for a full lap.
No, and I watched what Nico Rosberg said about that. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton's old teammate and the only person to be able to beat Lewis Hamilton in a world championship during the turbo hybrid era. He said like Bottas defended like just air for most of that. He moved over to defend from Max and just gave Max clean air going into the corner. Perfect clean air to break in, and Bottas completely misjudged his braking point.
Yeah,
which and takes the corner wrong and leaves the door wide open for Max to come through. And if you watch as well, like Lewis kind of did the same thing. Like the Mercedes drivers did not defend well this race.
I mean, they're not used to it, right?
Yeah, like having to put up strong, solid defenses is not
Yeah,
their
they're out of
cup of tea.
experience.
Yeah.
What else can we say about that? Yeah, like Bottas tires were super shot, and then we saw it in Hamilton, like a couple more laps, and he would have lost his position to Perez as well. What's crazy to me is how well Perez performed with only, at the end of the day, 2 sets of tires in his whole race. Like he did not pit again.
Yeah.
And he was able to keep the pressure, and I'm happy he made it to pole.
And that's just like Sergio Perez being like a smooth operator and
yep,
not jumping on the power too soon, not being too aggressive on the brakes or too hard on the steering wheel. Like he managed his tires perfectly.
Yeah, and so that's another thing that happened was that, like, I think Bottas, he had to defend. He had a lot more like to work his tires, and so by the time Max comes by, like his tires are already shot. There's like 3-4 laps left in the race. Like he's just trying to make it, home before the tires blow up. We got to think that Hamilton was in a very similar situation as well, right? They pitted around the same exact time. And yeah, the fact that Perez, who pitted a bit later, but still didn't have the fresh tires, just zoomed by Bottas again, got into the points. Like you could hear in Bottas' voice, he comes down on the radio and he's like, "Why does nobody listens to me? I fucking told you it was going to be a 2 pit stops race." Crazy, crazy.
And I mean, that's just one of those, like, the Mercedes strategists, I think, being a little bit full of themselves and going, no, Valtteri, we have all the data in front of us. We know what we are doing. Do not worry, Valtteri.
No. We're not going to listen to the dumb race car driver.
Nein. We do one stop, it's faster.
And then what was crazy to me as well is that they didn't even try to pit Valtteri to get the fastest lap. I think they had 3 or 4 laps to make it work, and they just decided it wasn't worth the risk. He wasn't going to have the time to warm up the tires, and then Max was able to get the point, even to add insult to the injury.
Yeah, and like I wasn't able to watch the race. I was at my grandparents' cottage for Father's Day, but I opened up my phone and I saw it said somebody has scored 26 points. And I was like, hey, somebody won with the fastest lap. So that is impressive. And then I got on my phone later and saw that Max had won with a fastest lap. That is not something that usually happens. Like usually, the 4th place driver puts on fresh tires to try and get that fastest lap and at least limit the damage on your team from not winning. So very interesting to see.
You know what? I don't know if that's what we're going to call it. I think we're going to have to find a better name than hat trick, maybe tire trick or some stupid F1 related name. But yeah, Max had it. Max had the tire trick. He won the race, got the fastest lap, and was voted driver of the day. So not bad of a weekend.
That's an amazing weekend for any driver, I think.
Yeah, you know what though? I don't think Lewis ever gonna win driver of the day, so he's kind of getting a disadvantage.
Yeah, no, Lewis has to like qualify 10th and then come first, and that he can maybe get driver of the day.
Yeah, he's just been dominant too long.
So now we said, obviously Ferrari had they sort of won the best of the rest qualifying with their 5th and 7th, and obviously thought that they were in a pretty good spot for the race. Well, did either of those cars finish in the points for the race?
No, not at all. Apparently
not at all.
What it looked like was that their car was just completely destroying their tires. I don't know if it was a bad adjustment or not proper, settings, calibrations, but they were going through their tires, and so they were forced to do a 2 pit stop just to be able to finish the race. But the way it worked out, Leclerc pitted again, and when he came out like 18th or 16th, and just was never able to come up and get any points.
And now I've heard the the sort of reasoning behind their tire issues from Mattia Binotto, the team principal. And he says, there are things we can do to the car to improve it, but at this point we'd have to change the wheel structure that we're running with. So
Oh boy. Okay.
they'd have to change the actual rims that they're using to have any real improvement on their tire degradation. So it very much comes down to the car they're on, and I think the changes being made to the tire pressures.
That's pretty crazy. I imagine they're going to be able to find a quick, solution or solve around, because the fact that we now have a three-header, so three race in a row in 3 weeks, so three race in 3 weeks, that doesn't give much time to engineering to create anything, or for the people in the garage to install them on the cars. So I hope they'll be able to find a bit more of the solution to what the problem was, because it was pretty obvious that they're not able to race right now because their tires were just degrading so quickly.
Yeah, and that degradation and them being forced to pit later in the race just to be able to make it to the end of the race allowed McLaren to sort of run away with that best of the rest, if you will, come fifth and sixth. And I think, we sort of saw this race, like Daniel Ricciardo was very back on form, being able to throw in lots of passes and get through people. So
yeah, starting
I
from 10th position and finishing sixth is really good. I agree. And you know what? Like McLaren, they've had a couple podium, but right now, fifth and sixth with no incident on track is probably the best they could expect. And I'm sure they were really happy with that.
yeah, and considering like you can almost guarantee it's going to be a Red Bull Mercedes 1 through 4. So that fifth and sixth for them is really all they could ask for, and I think as close to a win they're going to get this season without actually winning a race.
Another person I want to talk about quickly before we wrap up, but that I was so impressed with, was Lance Stroll. We said he started from 19th, and he was able to finish in the points. And every one of his overtakes were on track. It wasn't through some undercuts. It wasn't through pit stops or anything. He passed 9 cars on track to finish 10th. And you know how much of that action we saw on the TV from the directors? Absolutely zero.
It's one of those, like, I think they're all very focused on what's happening at the top, and obviously we have two of the best drivers in the world right now, and potentially two of the best drivers F1 has ever seen battling it out for the top position. And it's not very often that you get to see like real hardcore top level drivers racing against each other wheel to wheel. So I think they're very excited about that. Would have loved to see more of the midfield battle. I think pretty much every race, my favorite part to watch is the midfield battle, because you usually could get 4 or 5 cars running in a group and everybody trying to jockey for position. So it's definitely more exciting racing to watch in the midfield. But obviously the top two are who make all the big bucks and who really impact the championship fights. So I think that's sort of why we didn't get to see any of the passes. You got to see them in some replays and stuff, but the only time we've wanted to see a Lance Stroll replay.
It's pretty funny because like usually we actually do see that midfield battle, because the front runners, it's so boring. They're already just way ahead, and they're just counting down the laps until they win. And so it's almost like a good thing that it's a bad thing. It's almost a good thing that we're not seeing that midfield battle, because it means it's actually exciting up front. So I guess we're gonna have to take our losses here, but yeah, it's just pretty funny that the fact that we're complaining about this, it probably means a good thing for the sport.
Yeah, and now just on another note for McLaren, Lando Norris is the only driver to finish in the points every race this season.
Oh wow, that's a great stat.
That
Woo.
is, yeah, he has put in an amazing season so far. And he just keeps that point streak going, and I think it's awesome for McLaren and awesome for Lando to see that he's doing so well. I think he could be a future world champion if he stays in the sport long enough and grinds it out long enough. I think he could bring some glory back to McLaren.
I definitely see it, and I think McLaren sees it as well. And the new amount of like work and effort and money they've been putting into it, I believe that we could probably see it in 2 years or 3.
Yeah, in the new regulations, when hopefully everything gets evened up a bit, the cost cap comes in, so it'll be exciting to see.
Yeah. Another one at the end of the race that did really good. So Gasly finished P7. From P6 to P7 with the car he has, with no incident, with no cars going out, like very impressive stuff. So I wanted to salute that. Good job on Pierre Gasly. Alonso made up a spot, so he finished P8 in the points. Alpine needs all the point they can get. And finally, like I already said it, but we have both Aston Martins in the point. It feels great to see it, and hopefully it only gets better.
Sorry, I was looking at the wrong graphic. Yeah, it's great to see both Aston Martins in the point, both cars
Not many
putting
points,
in a good fight,
but still good.
Yeah, they racked up. That's I think 3 points for Aston Martin, which is still
1 point for 10 and 2 points for 9th, which is nothing compared to like 25 points if you win a race, but still.
It's still every point counts, and it's great for the team to be racking them up.
Yeah. All right. Finally, I guess we could kind of wrap up with 2 fun facts, or maybe 2 just observation that's looking good for the rest of the season. First of all, I just want to say this is like one of the rare occasions in Formula One where all 20 cars who started the race, or I guess we don't need to say 20, but all of the cars who started the race finished the race. There was no DNF, no accident, not even a yellow flag. What a crazy race. I imagine we were talking about how like the city circuits with the barrier were so so
punishing.
So punishing, creating so many incidents. But is it better? No damages. Like we got a good race out of it anyways, which was really surprising. And all 20 cars, it's an achievement because it just happens so rarely in F1.
Yeah, I think a good clean race, and it makes it doesn't extend the time that you're watching the race any. I think that's another like big barrier to watching F1 is, when cars crash, the race gets pretty boring because the yellow flag comes out, and then there's the virtual safety car and then a safety car, and it just, sort of slows everything down. And I think it's amazing to see everybody finishing, no yellow flags, just a good, solid, clean race. I think that's great for F1.
Yeah, definitely agreed with that. Finally, we talked about it a little bit at the start of the show, but every single time Red Bull wins, it's looking better on their side. They're looking like a stronger team, and their last couple of wins was in on city circuits, which doesn't mean much. Like it does mean they have a good car, but it's also a lot of luck, a lot of just right place at the right time. They just showed in a race where there was no incident at a very fast racetrack that doesn't have those braking area and those hard corners. They have a competitive car that can take a win away from Mercedes. What a great, exciting fact for F1 fans.
Yeah, and this has been, for I think as long as Paul Ricard has been on the modern calendar and they've been racing these cars, it has been a Mercedes track. It has been like, there hasn't been a car that can really take on Mercedes at this track, and it's amazing to see that the Red Bulls are really back in the fight.
Yeah, and we'll see what they do to keep that fight going next week at our next racetrack, our next Grand Prix, which is going to be in Austria, Red Bull home track, the Red Bull Ring. Imagine they win. I don't know. Do you know if they're going to have fans? Like, it's going to be a pretty crazy thing.
I'm not sure if they're going to have fans, but usually when they do, the Orange Army comes out in droves for
Max, Super Max.
Or Max. Such a great song. But yeah, it just, you see all the fans out in their orange gear. all their Red Bull stuff. They're super excited to watch him race and super passionate about, the Max Verstappen Red Bull win. I always love the Austrian Grand Prix for all of the Max Verstappen fans and just seeing all of them come out in droves to support a driver. It's something that you don't usually see. Like, you'll see it a little bit at Silverstone. I think there are definitely more Lewis fans there than any other driver, but it's just
You see you
it's
see it for like in Italy, which
oh
is
yeah,
like
all the Ferrari fans, all the
yeah,
Tifosi come
yeah,
out.
just
Yeah.
all the Tifosi. I guess for Leclerc recently, but yeah, just the Tifosis.
Yeah, it's just amazing in my opinion, the support that you see at that race.
Do you know if the circuit is different in any ways compared to the Austrian Grand Prix, which is going to be the weekend after? Like, is it reverse?
No, so they'll run the same track for safety reasons. With when they set up the like walls on the side, they're usually angled a certain way so that the emergency vehicles can come out and not be in super threat of being hit by one of the cars. So
Oh,
the
so they
walls are
can't do it.
usually,
Yeah, okay, they can't do it
yeah,
reverse. I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully they have like a different kind of setup or something layout, because that's definitely interesting. Like, I remember what happened last year at, was it in Saudi Arabia or the Emirates?
Bahrain, they were able
Yeah,
to,
but they did the outer circuit and the inner
yeah.
one. Yeah, that was
Now
that was pretty interesting.
yeah, Austria is a very short track, and they do have um an alternate layout at that track, but it makes it even shorter. So I don't think they'll be able to put in any changes. It's a pretty space efficient track. Like, they don't have a lot of extra space to sort of play around with. So it'll be interesting to see. It's definitely something that I would like to see when they do double header races, like what we're going to see in Austria. If they were able to make some modifications to the track, I think it would be great for the sport. But it's not something that I think is feasible at this next track.
Yeah, and especially considering the fact that double headers are pretty much just like fillers because of COVID and regular tracks not be able to run. So let's just be happy that we have, one more F1 race. But yeah, so the Styrian Grand Prix is going to be this weekend from the 25th of June to the 27th. Sunday, the 27th of June. It's at 9 a.m., just a pretty regular time. Hopefully, we get a good race. Red Bull has had a lot of trouble in past years, but with the way they've been racing this year, I think it's looking good, and they can definitely pull off the win.
Yeah, and now at last year's Styrian Grand Prix, because obviously there were two races at this track, so one is named for the region in Austria that the track is in, and the other is the Austrian Grand Prix. So at the 2020 Styrian Grand Prix last year, your top four was Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, Max Verstappen, and then Alex Albon.
Okay, yeah.
And if I remember, Albon got spun by Lewis pretty close to the end of the race. He was in a good spot, looking like I think he was potentially able to win, and then got spun, fell back, and is kind of the rest of his 2020 season kept going on that spin and that downward spiral.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of like it was looking like it was going on an uptrend, and then it just kind of went on a downtrend.
Yeah. So those were your top four last year. It was a Red Bull came sort of second in that race, if you want to say. I think they have a much stronger driver lineup this year, and I'm excited to see what they'll be able to do with Sergio Perez as a proper rear gunner for Max Verstappen.
All right. So we'll talk again next week after the race and give our opinions. Before we leave, do you want to take a bold guess about a certain driver qualifying a certain position or finishing the race in a certain amount of points?
I think Red Bull, it's their home race. It's the Red Bull Ring. I think they lock out the front row in quali and the race. I say Red Bull 1-2 all the way through the weekend.
Okay, I like that. That's definitely not guaranteed to happen. I want to say, you know what? Yeah, I want to say Stroll's gonna have a good weekend, outscore Sebastian, and finish 7th.
All right.
There we go. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. This was the VROOM podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.
Like, comment, and subscribe.